Giving you guys all a 5-minute warning. If you can grab your coffee, your snacks, and grab a seat, we'll get started in 5 minutes. Could I get Brian Tate up here as well?
Anywhere?
Sure. Do you want to do the first? Do you want to do? We can get him first.
James is first.
Good morning. Is everybody ready? Yay. Got all your coffee and snacks. Good to go. Welcome to the semi-annual Making Modern Treaties Work, Building Today for a Better Tomorrow gathering here on unceded Algonquin territory. My name's Medea Alatini. I'm going to be your MC for the next couple days. And I'm just going to go through a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. So there will be photos taken throughout the event. If you do not want your photo taken or shared, you need to opt out at the front at registration. Everybody, the bathrooms are outside under the stairs in that kind of atrium area out here. If you could please put your phones on silent or vibrate, that would be much appreciated. And there is a table at the front here for speakers that are on deck. So I'm going to call Dave Joe, Ethel Blond and Andrew, and John doesn't have to leave because he's up here in the front. If I can have them come to the front and be ready for their plenary session. So just to introduce myself, my name is Medea Alatini, so ING Medea Uye, Kluan Man Kai Je, Ama Gudia Je, Ata Ken Wilson Je, Asua Tutlasen, Asia Fred Chambers. I am Southern Shoshone. I'm from Kluane First Nation. My mother is Mary Jane Johnson. My grandmother is Lena Johnson. And my grandfather is Fred Chambers. My father is Ken Wilson. And I am the former chief of Kluane First Nation. I now run my own business, a consultancy that works with nations to build capacity, make change. I like to think of myself as a change agent, or my title right now is chief strategist, which is quite kind of fun. I'm a strong proponent of modern treaties, and it's a real honor to be here and see familiar faces, and I'm looking forward to meeting new people over the next 2 days. So I'm going to quickly run through your agenda before I hand it over to Sheldon to do an opening prayer and for our chairs to welcome you guys. So your agenda, you have 5 plenaries. We have the morning session where we have a plenary, we have 2 plenaries, and then just after lunch we have 5 plenary sessions, and you would have had to select those. So you have 2 blocks of those 5 plenary sessions, and then there is tonight a screening of a movie in the Suzor Coat room, and then reception in here. Tomorrow we go through plenaries in the morning again, and then just before lunch we'll have another 5-block panel of plenaries, and then again in the afternoon. There will be some priority setting in the afternoon, and language, culture, and the foundation for the future, and then a wrap up. So just to get us started in a good way, I'm going to invite Sheldon McGregor, Algonquin Nation Rep, to come up and open with a prayer. Thank you.
Hello, bonjour, kwe, wache, to my Cree friends out there. I'd like to welcome you all on unceded Algonquin territory. Wow, everybody's getting up way too quickly. I was hoping everybody would get at least like another sip of coffee. You know, I know we're Tuesday, we haven't hit the hump yet. But anyway, why us Algonquin people usually in traditional protocol, whenever we go to another territory, we ask permission for meetings from that group's cultural authority or just their band authority, just to make sure that we follow like our own protocols. And we've been asserting that more to show that we respect each other's territories and lands. So the tradition of this welcoming, it's not necessarily a prayer, but it's more of a welcoming and wishing people like good faith as a gesture of good faith, even if we're not politically, like Algonquin people are not treaty people. So we do not, so although we're not politically involved, we still wish you the best in the endeavor that you find. But anyway, I lost my train of thought. Definitely Tuesday. I guess to my Cree friends here, Egude. I'll start talking. I'll do the welcoming. Kwe kakina. Tanje mi gwachonje ya nongo. Mi gwacha ya kijamani dok. Ashija mani dok. Onje nongo. Idoko shinaya. Minoa magushina shijaya. Omama dosu onje nongo. Idoko ya mino pomazajik. Aya mino pomazi ya onje nongo ma idoko ya niwichku ya ningi wab manga ya nongo. Mi gwacha onje ya Migwachonje mashkiking, ashija nibing, ashija king, ashija wensi isak. Migwachonje ya mijim, ashija wenshishik. Migwachonje ya widoko ya, noa pubamsi ya nongom, ya ashija ya widoko ya, no bomek, kakanag wanikiwan, ya ganeshag. Ashija nishnabek, wanak, ganastanak, aya wabanak, aya kichemi gwach, ongoda, yeah. So that's the end of the prayer. And it was short and sweet because I only had 5 minutes. And I wish you all a very good meeting. Ayang Guamzin.
Thank you. Thank you, Sheldon. Kunishish. Now I would like to invite Brian Tate, the Executive Chairperson of the Nisga'a L'Sims Government, Co-Chair of LCAC, to say a few words.
Thank you, Master of Ceremonies. Amahitluk. Simgiget, Sigramana. Good morning, chiefs, matriarchs, leaders. Welcome to the conference, Making Modern Treaties Work, Building Today for a Better Tomorrow. That has so much meaning. And first of all, I'd like to begin by thanking the Algonquins people for allowing us to do business on our traditional territory. You know, building today has a lot of meaning for all of us. A lot of us that are in modern day treaties have left our families, our elders and children at home. And they know that we're here to do the good work, to allow them to be comfortable tomorrow. And for those yet unborn, our elders knew of this a long time ago, that for anybody to achieve anything, you have to work together. You have to have that understanding and respect. And we've been coming here since 2003, since the beginning of the coalition. And our leaders have been doing just that, coming here to build a better relationship, to build that relationship that is common to all of us that have signed treaties, agreements, so that our children can have a better tomorrow. And a lot of us have left loved ones and seen loved ones go before us. That understanding, the building of that, has to be meaningful. And it takes a lot of hard work and commitment. The First Nations people have struggled. Our Niska Nation, where I come from, it took them 113 years to achieve what we have, our Book of Opportunities, that makes us a part of Canada. But I certainly know that it's not going to take us 113 years to implement that agreement. And it's going to take a lot of good relation building and understanding. So I'm hoping that's what you get out of that today. I'm feeling a little bit tired today because I'm on BC time. We're 3 hours ahead and coming to Ottawa, so I had to try and burn off some of it yesterday at the next door. Oh, everybody knows what I'm talking about. That's good. I seen some of you there last night at the other conference. So anyways, good luck to everybody, and please build that relationship. That's what it's going to take for all of us to move forward. Thank you, and welcome.
Thank you, Brian, for that welcome remarks. James Itukaluk, Nunavut Tungavik, Inc. Oh, yes.
Good morning. Bonjour. I'm pleased to be here again today to represent Nunavut Tungavik Incorporated as a co-chair of the Land Claims Agreements Coalition. I'm from Talokyoak, Nunavut, straight north in the Central Arctic. Yesterday, temperature with the wind chill was minus 57. So down here, just like July to us. Our President, Aluki Kutuk, sent her greetings. She wanted to attend, but other commitments that she has did not allow her to come to do this meeting. We formed the Land Claims Agreements Coalition way back in 2003. We had a meeting at Modern Treaty Signatories to discuss many problems that we share in getting our agreements implemented. We decided to work together to ensure our agreements are fully implemented in spirit and intent. Signing a modern treaty and getting a ratifying legislation through Parliament marks just the beginning of a long process of implementation. We have found that many provisions of our agreements has not been carried out as they should have been. In NTR's case, the problem were severe enough for us to file a lawsuit against the federal government way back in 2006, a legal action that they finally settled with us in 2015. And some matters that we have made progress, for example, late last year, we finally reached agreement with the federal government on policy to implement Article 24 of our agreement, which deals with the government contract in our area. We are pleased with this, but it took 26 years. Progress indeed, but what a time frame. Our first plenary session today concerns an overview of our modern treaties, how they were negotiated, their importance. I'm pleased to see some of my old friends and acquaintances will be speaking on this session. I was personally involved in the negotiation of the Nunavut Agreement from 1989, first as a president of the Kittilmute Inuit Association, and then as a president of the Nunavut Tungavik of Nunavut, the organization that actually negotiated the claims. We signed our agreement way back in 1993, 2:30 in the morning, after a lot of work from 1970s. John Amarolik, who will be speaking this morning, was one of our negotiators. John played a key role in getting federal government to agree to Article 4 in our agreement. Article 4 provides for the creation of Nunavut territory and the government of Nunavut. I should say that during our negotiation, nothing was going smooth. I think it happened to every agreement that in Canada. Ours, for example, took a lot of time, and nothing was going smooth in most of the times. And the first agreement that we went through, the first proposal way back in 1976. John was there, and at the end of the meeting, we reject the proposal. It was just calling for Inuit to be advisory. We don't want to be advisory, just advisory to the government in our homeland. We want to be decision makers. We are glad we reject that proposal. Something else happened that time. John was on the airplane. The plane had to crash. It was trying to land 3 places, but the weather was not cooperating. So they ran out of gas before reaching Iqaluit. Everybody survived. So we are glad that John never perished that time. He did a lot of work after that to the people of Nunavut. This was something we saw as indispensable in getting more control of our own political future. It was an aspiration that the federal comprehensive land claim policy simply didn't provide for, so it was difficult achievement. But for us, it was a basic objective, and through a very complex process, we finally got it. It took almost 20 years to negotiate our agreement, and since then, another 27 years have gone by. Sadly, we lost many who were engaged in the negotiations. I would like to remember some of these people for a moment. I'm sorry to say that Bill Kemp, who did a lot of work on our land use and occupancy study in 1970s. Without that, we would never achieve our land claims agreement. We did a lot of occupancy studies, and the whole map of Northwest Territory was marked where people had been hunting and so forth, where people had been living. There was nothing left, just ink, the lines where people had been. Together, Milton Freeman, who passed away just last month, and last year we lost Tom Malloy, the Lieutenant Governor of Saskatchewan. Tom was the chief federal negotiator for our claim. Although he was on the opposite side of the table, we reached an agreement with him. Our agreement about finding a common together, we achieve our Nunavut land claims agreement. I think Tom did a lot of work, and he was a good negotiator on behalf of the federal government. I think he listened to us quite well, and he understands the people of Nunavut. So here we are, and when it comes to implementation of our land claims agreement, federal government, they agreed with us to implement the Nunavut agreement. A lot of times they try to have different interpretation of what's in the agreement. That's a problem. That's why we have to take them to court, and we settle our claims. And I'm glad this can be workable, and the agreement can be workable. It takes people. It takes you. It takes us. It takes federal government to implement it properly. So thank you very much, and have a good meeting. And thank you. Thank you. Merci. Thank you.
You guys are good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're done now? Yes. So thank you, Brian and James, for our welcoming remarks. We're going to get started with our first plenary. So if I can have Dave, Joe, and Ethel, Blonde, and Andrew join John up here at the front. And our first plenary is titled History, Diversity, Implications, and Benefits, an Insider's Overview of Land Claims Agreements. Yay. Good to see you. So Dave Joe is the president of Dave Joe Law Corporation. Ethel Blonde and Andrew is with the Satu Secretariat, Inc. John Amogalik, tripping over that, senior advisor of Nunavut Tungavuk, Inc. How many people have survived an airplane crash and continue to work? That's amazing. So now I'm going to leave it to you guys to take it away on our first plenary. Thanks. Guys are good? You want to go first? Okay.
Good morning, people. My name is Dave Joe. I'm a proud member of the Wolf Clan of Champagne-Ajax First Nations, and it's good to be on unceded Algonquin territory. And thank you, that nation, for allowing us to do this work in your territory. So thank you very much. My First Nation name is Dake, and it means speaker. So I was blessed with that name, vested with that name from my uncle Dave Hume. I got his Christian name, good Christian name, Dave, and Dake was, of course, his First Nation name. Now, what I'll be doing is that I'll be speaking basically about the Yukon Agreement. I want to do essentially three things. I want to talk a bit about the history of our claim and acknowledge the individuals that have worked on our final agreement in the Yukon, and certainly our agreement on self-government as well. And I also want to share some of the basic components of both the treaty and the agreement on self-government. And then I want to speed ahead and sort of guesstimate or anticipate some of the major issues that all modern treaty groups may face, but certainly in particular our experiences in the Yukon in that respect. Now, that person up there is Elijah Smith. Elijah is Champagne-Ajax First Nations as well. He's sort of the grandfather of the land claim movement in the Yukon Territory. I recognize that they sort of call me the godfather of the claim, but this is the real patriarch of our quest. Mr. Smith had a very interesting sort of life story. He was in the Army, of course, and he fought. And as most of you know, between 1927 and 1951, Indians were not allowed to own land. Indians weren't allowed to advance a land claim agreement. Indians were not allowed to go to law school. Indians were not allowed to retain legal counsel to advance their land claim agreement. And so when Mr. Smith came home, a lot like the other First Nation veterans across Canada, when he went to get his plot of land, to which he was entitled as part of being a soldier for Canada under the Veteran Lands Act, they said no. And he asked, why not? And they said, well, you are Indian, and there's a law in place that does not allow you to access any lands at all, notwithstanding the fact that you've enjoyed all of the freedoms that did not constrict or confine you when you were in the Army, but now you are back in Canada. Thank you to having fought for the freedom of other people, but in your case, we are sorry you don't get your land allotment. So, of course, as he tells the story, he got upset about it, and hence the push for a treaty in the Yukon Territory. Now, the first request for a treaty came from Chief Isaac from Dawson City. In 1898, there was a big gold discovery in the Klondike, and thousands of people came up to the Klondike. They guesstimate between 30 to 40,000, and as a result of that, that put a lot of pressure on both the land, the resources, the caribou that was there, and so the first chief basically requested a treaty. And that request, of course, was denied. 3 years later, the Chief Jim Boss from Ta'an, likewise, I pledged and pushed for a treaty for his people as well. And that request was denied as well. Now, in 1969, as you all know, once the law came off the books that we can pursue a land claim, in 1951, Yukon First Nations did. They began to organize and formed brotherhoods, sisterhoods, and began to pursue a modern land claim agreement. And then in 1965, right next door in the state of Alaska, the Tlingit Haida launched a title action in the state of Alaska. And that action was successful and was premised upon their native title concepts, and they were adopted. And when the Americans discovered oil on the north slope of Alaska, the Americans knew that title action likely would be pursued by the native people of Alaska, and so they extinguished the totality of title through an act of Congress. And that occurred in 1971. We were aware of that. We did meet with the people of Alaska in 1972, and just prior to that, of course, Pierre Trudeau had adopted what was termed the White Paper Policy. And that White Paper Policy, by and large, attempted to transfer all of the First Nation reserve land and vacate the authority and responsibility that Canada had for Indians and transfer them over to the provinces. And this action by Pierre Trudeau sort of confirmed our determination that we should pursue a modern land claim agreement. So in 1973, we got all the chiefs agreeing, and they advanced a proposal entitled Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow. And we filed that petition with Trudeau on Valentine's Day, ironically, in 1973, in advance of or just subsequent to the Nisga'a case. The Nisga'a had gone to court, and as you all know, they won their Aboriginal title case. The court found that it does exist. The only issue or the only question is whether or not it had been extinguished. So in the Yukon, very quickly, we've got 14 Yukon First Nations, and 11 of them have signed treaty agreements. And they represent about 6 of the 8 tribal groups amongst the Yukon First Nations. And they have the 3 First Nations that have not signed agreements are represented by the Kaska and by the Upper Tanana from the western part of the Yukon. And the final agreements are premised upon a common agreement that applies to all of the Yukon First Nations. So if you want a treaty in the Yukon, you're going to have to adopt the common terms. And those common terms are set up in a document called the Emberala Final Agreement, or the UFA. So those terms generally apply in common to any of the final agreements in Yukon. And every First Nation thereafter is allowed to negotiate specific terms that are unique for them, like the amount of land quantum, what the total allowable harvest may be for sheep or for moose. And so those terms equally form a part of their treaty agreement. Now, also, the final agreement is comprised of 28 chapters. And of course, we don't have time to go through those 28 chapters. And there's some 30 sections or chapters within the agreements on self-government as well. Now, as it notes there that all of the final agreements are treaties, so they are protected under Section 35(3) of the Constitution Act 1982, and so that they are shielded from any infringement from charter challenge under Section 25. So that is clear. The agreements that we have dealing with our lawmaking capacities under our SGA agreements, though, are not entrenched. Those are not treaty rights. So this agreement in the Yukon is different than the Nisga'a Treaty in the sense that our lawmaking capacities within our agreements on self-government are not entrenched. The reason that they weren't was because Canada did not have a policy back then about recognizing First Nation rights to pass laws over their citizen, over their lands, but Canada now has that policy in place, and indeed has that policy in place since 1995. So that is the good news there. And the SGA agreements, or the agreements on self-government, again, there are 11 of them in the Yukon. They are given effect by contract and by a federal law. Last week in the Yukon Supreme Court, there was a charter challenge in which a member of a First Nation said it's unfair to have a constitutional requirement that if you run and are elected as a chief or councillor to move within the traditional territory of that First Nation, it's contrary to the charter, and because your agreement is given effect by a federal law, vicariously you are caught by Section 32. It applies to Canada and the provinces and the territories, and vicariously you are included, and therefore the charter applies. Of course, how that is being defended currently is that the agreements that we have over our lawmaking capacities are not only contractual, but they are other rights that exist for the application of Section 25 as well. And if they aren't, then they are reasonable constraints. And perhaps even if they aren't, the First Nations, if they are included within Section 32, can have access to the notwithstanding clause. So that may be possible as well. So we do have on the aspect of reserve lands. In the Yukon, we did have reserve lands. The final agreement says you could keep them as 9124 reserve lands with the present Indian Act applying. You could keep them as 9124 lands with your SGA powers applying, or you could simply convert them to settlement lands. So those are the three choices, and the good news about some of those claims are that if there's any residual specific claims that are retained, they are applicable on those reserve lands as well. In terms of the land quantum amounts, there's 16,060 square miles of land. 60 square miles of those lands are basically the reserve lands that I spoke about that are included. Of the 16,000 square miles of land, 10,000 of them come with the subsurface resources, the oil, the gas, the minerals, etc. And one of the inventions that we've got in Chapter 5 is that all of the First Nations are allowed to retain Aboriginal title to any portions of their 16,060 square miles of land as well. The form of title is that it's viewed as Aboriginal title equivalent to fee simple. So if fee simple is the highest sustainment of land, then your form of title is equivalent to that fee simple estate as well. And there has been, as the note says, a conditional release to the land and water within our territory. We view it as a contract. If there's a fundamental breach of the treaty, then we could revisit some aspects of our release of title to land and water within the respective territories of the First Nations. And all of that land, of course, is shared amongst the 14 Yukon First Nations in a formula and in a process in which they agreed upon. And of course, that was a very sort of arduous, of course, process as well. There's two quick chapters that I wanted to touch upon. One is Chapter 11, Land Use Planning. This issue went all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada about whether or not the government of Yukon could reject a land use plan that had been recommended, and Yukon having the freedom to substitute their own version of a land use plan. The Supreme Court of Canada said no. The Chapter 11 formula and process and procedures are established in accordance with the treaty, and you cannot deviate from that. And if you do, then your actions are offside with the terms of the treaty. And that Supreme Court of Canada case is Nacho Nayakdan versus Yukon, if you wanted to look up that case. Under Chapter 12, we were in court on that issue as well, simply because Stephen Harper wanted to expedite or truncate the development assessment process that assesses all developments that occur in the Yukon Territory on private lands, on Crown lands, First Nation lands, etc. So we have a common process that applies, and they attempted to short-circuit that process by amending the federal law that gave effect to the terms of this treaty. And we basically said, you can't do that because you failed to consult with us, you breached the honor of the Crown, there's a process to amend the agreements, and the long and short of that story is that we agreed outside of the court action to reset that process, and we agreed that they would restore the consistency of the federal law that gave effect to the term of this treaty. On self-government, very quickly, because our agreements are not entrenched, because we have not modified the totality of our rights, titles, and interests in the Yukon, we've retained the inherent right, the common law right, to the term self-government. So that's retained and it survives within Section 35(1) as well. And there is a number of rights that we've got that are expressed within the agreement, and I will quickly get into that agreement. For example, we've got about 4 categories within the agreement on self-government that speaks to our lawmaking authority. One is that we've got exclusive jurisdiction. It's important to retain that, I think, because the provinces have that authority in Section 92. Canada has that authority in Section 91. Where is, I would ask the question, our exclusive authority? Where is your exclusive authority? For the purpose of the Yukon, it's in Section 13.1 of their agreement, and we have exclusive authority over the administration of, in this case, Champagne-Ajac affairs and matters that are internal to them. So they can determine if they're going to structure their processes through a wolf or a crow system, if they're going to elect their chief and councillors, if they're going to appoint them through a clan system. That's all of their exclusive authority. Secondly, they could also manage any of the rights within the treaty itself. That's part of their exclusive authority. So if Champagne-Ajac were, that's where I'm from, wanted to cut me a check for the totality of the money, I'm dreaming now a bit, but that's something that they have the exclusive authority to do over. Now, the second category is what I would call paramount concurrent over citizens in the Yukon. So there's a list of lawmaking authorities that are expressed there. Some of them like healthcare, social services, adoption, children, education, etc., all apply to your citizens in Yukon. So your lawmaking authority is not confined to your settlement land, not confined to your traditional territory, applies to your children and your citizens in Yukon. And to the extent that there's any conflict or inconsistency with the law of Yukon, it's your law, the First Nation law, that is paramount in that respect. Now, the other category of lawmaking is paramount concurrent authority on settlement land. And this basically determines the exclusive use or the paramount concurrent use by First Nations of their 16,060 square miles of land. They can determine exclusively what they're going to do with that land. It comes completely within their authority to the extent that there's any conflicts with indeed law of Yukon, the First Nation law wins out. Secondly, if there's any conflicts with Canada on some of these issues like firearms, which comes under the Criminal Code of Canada, And if the First Nation standard on firearm is applicable on their settlement land, the question remains, which law is paramount? The federal criminal code on firearms or the First Nation lawmaking authority in that regard? And the short answer is we don't know. There's a process that is prescribed within 13.5.2 of these agreements in which Canada and the First Nations were to sit down and basically determine which law is paramount. So this is equally applicable to firearms and to casinos, for example, that come under Section 207 of the Criminal Code. Perhaps other issues like a nuisance that may infringe upon the criminal code as well. So there's a list of areas in which the issue of federal paramountcy or First Nation paramountcy has not been determined yet. Now, the one area that we do not have paramount control over is, of course, taxation. So we share income tax, GST, all other forms of tax prescriptively with either Yukon or Canada through a tax sharing agreement. The gist of it, though, is that 95% of the income from direct taxation of individuals or land or interests is returned to the First Nation. About 5% is shared with Canada, and of course, the other between Canada and Yukon. Now, on my last slide here, in closing, I just want to say that to give you an example how one First Nation, this is Carcross Tagish, how they have decided to structure themselves. They got 6 clans, and their general council, their lawmaking body, their parliament, is comprised of 18 members. And so they are appointed, of course, from the 6 clans, 3 per clan. And they, of course, pass all of the laws. The executive authority is vested in the chief and council, but the lawmaking authority is vested in the general council in that regard as well. And they also have a justice council for which all of the clans participate, and they, 1 per clan, and they allow the First Nations to basically administer the administration of justice. So it allows them to establish their own tribal court, their own First Nation peacemaker court, to adjudicate, enforce, and correct offenders of their laws as well. And that's determined in a very independent way through their Justice Council. So in a very summary fashion, it outlines some of the issues, and I would like to thank you for your time. Thank you.
Water? Yeah, please. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I want to take the time to say how absolutely honored I am to be able to share the stage with John Amagwalik and David Joe. I learned over the years so many things from these 2 gentlemen. I remember as a young MP, I was in Parliament for 17 years, and one of the first things I did was I was on a committee, and that committee was on the High Arctic exiles. And I remember one day in the committee, we had a delegation. It was John Amagwalik and some of his people including his mother. It was a very, very touching, as you well know, the high Arctic exiles were people that were relocated, and relocated to a very foreign place. That wouldn't happen today, but it was truly remarkable. And then to reflect on David Joe, I've been spending time with David over the last number of days, and we were with the youth doing a youth and treaty simulation. And that youth and treaty simulation had those negotiations, and I was with a group stuck one day, and David was coming from the washroom, and we stopped him. And like in a split second, he had a suggestion for us. He said, "Oh, maybe this is what you should do. Not do this, but maybe this is what you should do." And it was perfect. That's what seasoned individuals who have worked out there, who have done what he has done, are capable of doing. It's all that wise knowledge and information becomes available to other people because of the work that they take on. So I'm just really honored to be here with them today. For me, I was raised in the Northwest Territories, and I'm like all of you. I lived in the bush part-time. I went to residential school. I come from a big community family. I was born in Toledo, Northwest Territories, and never did it ever occur to me that we weren't as good as anybody else. I always felt, no matter where I was, that we have a right to be here. I was kind of driven to that place by my grandmother. My grandmother was a fearless woman. She lived in a patriarchal society, but she gave advice to chiefs, and she sat with the elders. It was a very big role model in my life that never left me. I learned never be afraid, because if you're afraid, that takes everything away from you, including the opportunities to go forward. So I learned a good lesson from her. She was not educated outside of her traditional knowledge, but she knew about medicine, she knew all that stuff. Now, getting down to the brass tacks of what I'm here to do is to talk about the Sawtooth claim. It has been 27 years since the claim was signed, and what preceded the claim was Treaty 11. Treaty 11 in my area was driven by what the government wanted from us. They wanted access to our land. They wanted also to be able to extract our resources. The main driver between Treaty 11, the government, and our people was oil and gas at that time in 1921. In 1921, Chief Albert Wright was the chief in the Sawtooth region. My grandfather was also a chief, Zol Blond, and if you look at the text of Treaty 11, you'll see from our region that my grandfather signed it and Albert Wright signed it. You come by these things honestly. Your experience is driven by the people in your life. And I've always known my history from my family that that's where we were coming from. When the government came to Chief Albert Wright and said, we need to do this treaty, and the chief said, how can you do the treaty? The Mountain Dene are gone. They're gone on their spring hunt. They're not in town. And the government said, well, we need to sign this summer. So he took his dog pack, he took his dogs, put the dog packs on them, and he walked across the river. There was ice there still. It was that good. No, I'm joking. But anyways, he he walked across with his dogs into the mountain, and when he got there, the mountain Dene weren't there. They had traveled into the Yukon to visit with their family and spring hunt with their family members over the mountain. And he saw their trail, and he left a number of posts in the ground saying in syllabics that the government wanted to make a treaty, that they should come back right away so they could talk to them. Talk about Big C consent and consultation. This is 1921, and this is a man who never set foot in a school. He took it upon himself to get his people. They came back, and from his traditional knowledge of the traditional trails, they hit the first post when they got to the border, and then they followed the other posts. And I took an elder in 1989 or so my husband and I took an elder to the last post that the government had refurbished. And to see the syllabics on it, the elder reached out and touched that post. His name was Frankie Alley. He touched the post, and we could see tears in his eyes. And he said, "Our people sure knew how to do things right." That's a real bold statement of confidence. So anyways, just to say that our people are natural negotiators. I heard David say yesterday that negotiation's part of your life. You wake up in the morning, you start negotiating, and you negotiate till you go to sleep. And if you think about it, that's so true. Our family's been there. They weren't trained in any of the institutions, but they knew that. So when they came back to town, they met with the government, and they did the treaty in 1921. The government was thirsting and lusting for access to what was proven to be a very, very long and plentiful and rich resource of oil in Norman Wells. That's where I live. In our claim, we have a chapter that deals with that whole issue. It's called the Proven Area Agreement. We have it, and any time, I think that's my dad playing fiddle. Any time that we want people to, that's my grandmother in residential school with my mother, Cecilia. And there's the fearless one, Catherine Onte Blondin, the chief's wife. She was Chief Zoll's wife, and she was a very good advisor to my grandpa. Anyways, Proven Area Agreement is one of the main chapters. It gives us a ticket. We have Proven Area Agreement meetings every year with the Government of Canada and with Imperial Oil. It is the way it is because our people had the foresight to put it in there. First of all, to put it in the treaty, or to have the treaty not signed until they dealt with that. And then secondly, putting it in the claim. So to this day, we have had meetings with the government on contamination, on any kind of impact benefits agreements, employment. We have a whole area by which we negotiate anything modern. So if you go from Treaty 11, I'm still in 1921, guys. I might run out of time, but that's okay. You'll still get something wonderful from these two individuals. We dial forward and go to, by the way, the government always says to us when we want something, they always say, you have to pay, you have to have access to some resource. There's got to be a reason why we give you a highway, or we give you a barge, or we give you anything, a boat. We need a reason. Well, here's the reason. In 1921, they did the Norman Wells Proven Area Agreement, and they did the treaty. And then during the war, they wanted access to uranium, and they got it through Great Bear Lake in our region. And what they did was they had the ore carriers as our people who were exposed to all that contamination. Many of them died of cancer. It's a huge issue on Great Bear Lake. They wanted to have fuel for the war. So they decided towards the end of the war that they were going to build a pipeline, and they built it from Norman Wells right over into the Yukon, and it's called the Canal Trail. They brought people from all over, and our people, my Uncle Eddie, my dad, and my cousin George, were all people that worked on the pipeline. They could not have navigated that land without our people. And so when I look back and I think about, and in 1994, they expanded the Norman Wells they did the pipeline to Alberta, to Zama, and they expanded the Norman Wells oil field. So they have gotten more than enough. Most of the money went to the federal government and to the company. The other thing that was really interesting is when the government took the money, we weren't guaranteed that we were going to get anything back from there. It's been a long, hard fight and struggle to get what we get out of Norman Wells. And to this day, we actually thought about buying out or becoming a partner in buying out Norman Wells, but it's nearing the end of its life, so those are some of the side stories that go along with what we do. So in 1994, on June 23rd, you dial forward, we signed a modern treaty. And we had what we had was we had people like George Cleary, Bobby Overvold. We had a lot of chiefs and elders, George Kodakin, coming back and forth to Ottawa to negotiate a claim. They started off as a comprehensive claim, and that didn't work. It went down. Then we broke it into regional claims. And believe it or not, I was there for every single claim that got signed. When the SAW-2 one came into the House for final reading, I was there. And the people had done a tremendous amount of work. There are some things on which you can't change the government's mind. There were a few things. We wanted self-government within the claim, but we didn't get that. There was the extinguishment clause. Nobody in the right mind wanted that. It was government policy. It was not SAW-2's fault. They have to deal with the cards they're given at the table. And so when you think about it, they did their level best to get everything that they had to empower their people and to have the tools to move forward in a modern day society. SAW-2, at the time that the land claims was signed, we ended up with, I hope I can read my own writing. We ended up with $75 million, and we had the capacity to have capital transfers for $130 million tax-free for 15 years. We also had the land claims. Those of you that have claims, they are unique legal and constitutional arrangements, documents. It doesn't get any more profound or more embedded in what government views to be the vestiges of power. This is what we had, and this is this is what our people were able to accomplish. We had 75 million, and we also had, as I indicated, we had exclusive hunting, trapping, and fishing rights over the area of 280,000 square kilometers, including Great Bear Lake. We had also a cadre of institutional bodies, the bodies that were going to make our claim work. And these were the Sahtu Renewable Resources Board, the Sahtu Land Use Plan, the Sahtu Secretariat, Inc., which ran the business of governing for Sahtu. We had also another organization which held the Grand Chiefs and Chiefs